Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. Today we are going to be in Numbers chapter 32 verse 1 through chapter 33 verse 39. Now, the Reubenites and the Gadites possessed a very large number of cattle. When they saw that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were ideal for cattle, the Gadites and the Reubenites came and addressed Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the leaders of the community. They said, Adaroth, Deepen, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elealeh, Sebam, Nebo, and Beon. The land that the Lord subdued before the community of Israel is ideal for cattle, and your servants have cattle. So they said, If we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for our inheritance. Do not have us cross the Jordan River. Moses said to the Gadites and the Reubenites, Must your brothers go to war while you remain here? Why do you frustrate the intent of the Israelites to cross over into the land which the Lord has given them? Your fathers did the same thing when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. When they went up to Eshcol Valley and saw the land, they frustrated the intent of the Israelites, so that they did not enter the land that the Lord had given them. So the anger of the Lord was kindled that day, and he swore, Because they have not followed me wholeheartedly, not one of the men 20 years old and upward who came from Egypt will see the land that I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they followed the Lord wholeheartedly. So the Lord's anger was kindled against the Israelites, and he made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years, until all that generation had done wickedly before the Lord was finished. Now look, you are standing in your father's place, a brood of sinners, to increase still further the fierce wrath of the Lord against the Israelites. For if you turn away from following him, he will once again abandon them in the wilderness, and you will be the reason for their destruction. Then they came very close to him and said, We will build sheepfolds here for our flocks and cities for our families, but we will maintain ourselves in armed readiness and go before the Israelites until whenever we have brought them to their place. Our descendants will be living in fortified towns as a protection against the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until every Israelite has his inheritance. For we will not accept any inheritance on the other side of the Jordan River and beyond, because our inheritance has come to us on this eastern side of the Jordan. Then Moses replied, If you will do this thing, and if you will arm yourselves for a battle before the Lord, and if all your armed men cross the Jordan before the Lord, until he drives out his enemies from his presence, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then afterward you may return and be free of your obligation to the Lord and to Israel. This land will then be your possession in the Lord's sight. But if you do not do this, then look, you will have sinned against the Lord, and know that your sin will find you out. So build cities for your descendants and pens for your sheep, but do what you have said you would do. So the Gadites and the Reubenites replied to Moses, Your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our children, our wives, our flocks, and all our livestock will be there in the cities of Gilead. But your servants will cross over, every man, armed for war, to do battle in the Lord's presence, just as my Lord says. So Moses gave orders about them to Eleazar the priest, to Joshua son of Nun, and to the heads of the families of the Israelite tribes. Moses said to them, If the Gadites and the Reubenites cross the Jordan with you, each one equipped for battle in the Lord's presence, and you conquer the land, then you must allot them the territory of Gilead as their possession. But if they do not cross over with you, armed, they must receive possessions among you in Canaan. Then the Gadites and Reubenites answered, Your servants will do what the Lord has spoken. We will cross armed in the Lord's presence into the land of Canaan, and then the possession of our inheritance that we inherit will be ours on this side of the Jordan River. So Moses gave to the Gadites, the Reubenites, into half the tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph, the realm of King Sihon of the Amorites, and the realm of King Og of Bashan, the entire land with its cities and its territory surrounding them. The Gadites rebuilt Dibon, Adaroth, Aroer, Atroth-Shophan, Jazer, Jogbehah, Beth Nimrah, and Beth Haran as fortified cities, and constructed pens for their flocks. The Reubenites rebuilt Heshbon, Elealeh, Kirithaim, Nebo, Baal-Meon, with a change of name, and Sibmah. They renamed the cities they built. The descendants of Machir, son of Manasseh, went to Gilead, took it, and dispossessed the Amorites who were in it. So Moses gave Gilead to Machir, son of Manasseh, and he lived there. Now Jair, son of Manasseh went and captured their small towns, and named them Havoth-jair. Then Nobah went and captured Kenath and its villages, and called it Nobah, after his own name. These are the journeys of the Israelites, who went out of the land of Egypt by their divisions, under the authority of Moses and Aaron. Moses recorded their departures according to their journeys, by the commandment of the Lord. Now these are their journeys according to their departures. They departed from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, on the day after the Passover. The Israelites went out defiantly, in plain sight of all the Egyptians. Now the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom the Lord had killed among them. The Lord also executed judgment on their gods. The Israelites traveled from Ramesses and camped in Succoth. They traveled from Succoth and camped in Etham, which is on the edge of the wilderness. They traveled from Etham and turned again to Pi-hahiroth, which is before Baal-zephon. And they camped before Migdol. They traveled from Pi-hahiroth and passed through the middle of the sea into the wilderness, and went 3 days' journey into the wilderness of Etham, and camped in Marah. They traveled from Marah and came to Elam. In Elam there are 12 fountains of water and 70 palm trees, so they camped there. They traveled from Elam and camped by the Red Sea. They traveled from the Red Sea and camped in the wilderness of Zin. They traveled from the wilderness of Zin and camped in Dophkah. And they traveled from Dophkah and camped in Alish. They traveled from Alish and camped at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. They traveled from Rephidim and camped in the wilderness of Sinai. They traveled from the desert of Sinai and camped at Kibroth Hattaavah. They traveled from Kibroth Hattaavah and camped at Hazeroth. They traveled from Hazeroth and camped in Rithmah. They traveled from Rithmah and camped at Rimmon Perez. They traveled from Rimmon Perez and camped in Libnah. They traveled from Libnah and camped at Risa. They traveled from Risa and camped in Kehelathah. They traveled from Kehelathah and camped at Mount Shefer. They traveled from Mount Shefer and camped in Haradah. They traveled from Haradah and camped in Machalath. They traveled from Machalath and camped at Tahath. They traveled from Tahath and camped at Terah. They traveled from Terah and camped at Mithkah. They traveled from Mithkah and camped in Hashmanah. They traveled from Hashmanah and camped in Maseroth. They traveled from Maseroth and camped in Bene-Jaakan. They traveled from Bene-Jaakan and camped at Hor-Hagadad. They traveled from Hor-Hagadad and camped in Jotbathah. They traveled from Jotbathah and camped in Abranah. They traveled from Abranah and camped at Ezion-Geber. They traveled from Ezion-Geber and camped in the wilderness of Zin, which is Kadesh. They traveled from Kadesh and camped in Mount Hor, at the edge of the land of Edom. Aaron the priest ascended Mount Hor at the command of the Lord, and he died there in the 40th year, after the Israelites had come out of the land of Egypt, on the first day of the 5th month. Now Aaron was 123 years old when he died in Mount Hor. Okay. So, chronicled all their wanderings through the desert, which did a study on this with a friend once. It seemed like many of these places, we don't know exactly where they are, just because there's no people there, and in order for you to have a preserved name of what that place is, there has to be people there. So, the path isn't exactly super clear where and how the Israelites traveled through the wilderness. But they eventually got up to Israel. And in the first chapter, in case you didn't catch it, the Reubenites and the Gadites, and I think the half-tribe of Manasseh, see, you have Israel, and then you have the Jordan River, and then they wanted the other side of the Jordan River, where the Amorites, I think, had been living. So Moses agreed to that on the condition that they would come cross over the Jordan River and help their brothers in the armed conflict against the people of the land. So They agreed to those terms. Luke chapter 4, verse 31 through chapter 5, verse 11. So he went down to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and on the Sabbath he began to teach the people. They were amazed at his teaching, because he spoke with authority. Now in the synagogue there was a man who had the spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried out with a loud voice, "Ha! Leave us alone, Jesus the Nazarene. Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him. "Silence, come out of him." Then after the demon threw the man down in their midst, he came out of him without hurting him. They were all amazed and began to say to one another, "What's happening here? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out." So the news about him spread into all areas of the region. After Jesus left the synagogue, he entered Simon's house. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he stood over her, commanded the fever, and it left her. Immediately she got up and began to serve them. As the sun was setting, all those who had any relatives sick with various diseases brought them to Jesus. He placed his hands on every one of them and healed them. Demons also came out of many, crying, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak, because they knew that he was the Christ. The next morning Jesus departed and went to a deserted place. Yet the crowds were seeking him, and they came to him and tried to keep him from leaving them. But Jesus said to them, "I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns too, for that is what I was sent to do." So he continued to preach in the synagogues of Judea. Now Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing around him to hear the word of God. He saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then Jesus sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and lower your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing, but at your word I will lower the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets started to tear. So they motioned to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats, so that they were about to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For Peter and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, Zebedee's sons, who were Simon's business partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will be catching people." So when they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. One of the more interesting theories I've heard lately um, about why these demons address Jesus by his first name is that they're trying to exercise some sort of power over him, and that in like first century artifacts that we have, there's often like magical aliments or amulets or talismans that invoke some sort of divine name and then ask them to do something. And the idea is that that if you know a being's true name, you have power over them, which the demon was theoretically attempting to do by invoking Jesus's name without having met him before, and commanding him to leave us alone. But Jesus doesn't follow this formula. He just gives him a simple imperative: silence, come out of him. And so Jesus was portrayed stronger than the magic known of the day. And the catch of fish that that Simon and his friends caught was clearly supernatural, as just by catching that many fish, they were astonished at Jesus. Okay, continuing on, Psalm chapter 64, verses 1 through 10. Listen to me, O God, as I offer my lament. Protect my life from the enemy's terrifying attacks. Hide me from the plots of evil men, from the crowd of evildoers. They sharpen their tongues like a sword. They aim their arrow, a slanderous charge, in order to shoot down the innocent in secluded places. They shoot at him suddenly and are unafraid of retaliation. They encourage one another to carry out their evil deed. They plan how to hide snares and boast who will see them. They devise unjust schemes. They disguise a well-conceived plot. Man's inner thoughts cannot be discovered, but God will shoot at them. Suddenly they will be wounded by an arrow. Their slander will bring about their demise. All who see them will shudder, and all people will fear. They will proclaim what God has done and reflect on his deeds. The godly will rejoice in the Lord and take shelter in him. All the morally upright will boast. These evil men are aiming slanderous charges at the psalmist. That is, unjustly accusing him of something, and plotting and scheming to bring him down, and saying that God will bring about their destruction via their own slander. Their slander will bring about their demise. So, God reveals what's hidden in the hearts of men. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 22. Like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who rejects discretion. So, not good to not have discretion. Okay, well, thank you for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.